Starting your own business can be challenging. In order to grow, you need to know how to assemble an all-star team, how to perform a market analysis that will provide critical insights, how to structure your business, and so much more. This episode's guest, Nancy Trigg, will guide us in the steps to start a business. Welcome to the 529 podcast, where we interview successful entrepreneurs to share their experiences and insights with those interested in beginning their own entrepreneurial journeys. I am your host, Nathan Antla, and today we have Nancy Trigg, founder and CEO of her own startup advisory organization, Trigg Performance Collective. Nancy's business career started when she landed an executive assistant role and began to learn how a business was operated. She took that knowledge and became a sales manager and did a bit of advising as well. Overall, Nancy has been a part of several startups, helped many businesses strive towards success. Today, Nancy will discuss the importance of partnerships, creating and managing a proper team, how to go to market, and more. Without further ado, let's get into it. Hey, Nancy, thank you for coming on to the podcast today.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I'm looking forward to speaking with y'all today.
So why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'm Nancy Trigg. I'm the founder and CEO of Trigg Performance Collective. It is a startup advisory organization. My background, I actually have had 2 successful startups as the head of growth. The very first startup that I worked with was a small company many of you may have heard of, Atlas Software at the time. The product was SketchUp, just 3D design. We were purchased. I joined that organization as the first salesperson, as one of the early founding team members, built the sales organization out. A few years in, we were purchased by Google, and I ran the SketchUp business within Google for about 6 years, at which time we were Google's first ever divestiture. We were sold out of Google and into a company called Trimble Navigation. So that was my project for 13 years, was running that sales organization. And then spent a couple of years consulting after that, and then joined a previous coworker of mine at Google who started a point of sale company specifically for the craft beverage industry. I joined him as president and head of growth, and we grew that business to $100 million valuation, over 1,500 business customers. And unfortunately, that particular role, we had gone the VC route, and the VCs did eventually push out the founder. And I chose to leave at that time and start my own side hustle, as I like to call it, as sort of a fractional go-to-market strategist for startups.
Can you tell me why you kind of got started into startups? What got you interested in it?
So I originally, when I graduated school, I thought my career was going to be teaching. That's what I went to school for. And I have nothing but respect for teachers. I tried it and couldn't cut it. I found myself very frustrated with having 60 bosses, which is what you have when you're a teacher. So I left and got a job as an administrative assistant. I wanted to learn a bit more about the business world. I oversold myself and landed in an executive assistant role, which usually takes a lot of years to get to, but I got lucky and convinced a CEO to hire me. And that CEO was really interested in having me do a lot of his work for him, which might sound annoying to some, but to me it was great because he was pulling me into everything from mergers and acquisitions to setting sales quotas, doing due diligence, handling patent work. So he threw the gamut at me. And to me, I considered that a paid learning opportunity and just soaked it all up. While I was at that company, I was there for about 3.5 years through an acquisition. I really got a bird's eye view of what a business organization looked like. And really, honestly, at the time, I made decisions in a very odd way, but it seemed like sales had the most fun. It seemed like it was the most interesting job where you got to travel and talk to lots of customers. So I just decided that I wanted to be in a sales role when I left that company. So again, I overconfidently shot for jobs I wasn't qualified for and did land a job as a sales development rep, an entry-level SDR at a tech company in Longmont, Colorado. So did that for a couple of years. And while there, I always apply for jobs. I'm just going to say this, but it doesn't matter how happy I am in my job and career. I'm always looking at what's out there. I just think it's important to know, 1, your value in the marketplace, and 2, what's available, what sort of jobs are coming to the market, what the marketplace looks like. And I had just randomly applied to what sounded like a fun sales job to me. Part of why I applied to it was that it was a non-traditional ad. It didn't have a lot of the regular jargon that you see in boring corporate job descriptions, and it had a lot of flair and fun and playfulness. So I applied for it just on a whim as the first salesperson at a startup, and that turned out to be SketchUp. I did get that job, and that's when my startup career started. And I remember at the time, a lot of people were really scratching their heads at why I would make this decision. I had a fairly successful corporate job working for a large organization. I was a single parent, so, income was important, benefits were important, and nobody understood why I was quitting this secure thing to go do something I thought was fun. But for me, it was about finding a career that I enjoyed, not just finding a career that paid the bills. And I have never looked back. I don't regret that decision to move at all. Pretty quickly after joining as the first salesperson, I was moved into management and got to build the sales organization at a startup. That's an experience I never would have gained had I stayed in corporate, where more qualified people were getting those promotions. So long answer to your question, but that's how I got there. And I found right away that I really loved the hustle of a startup. I loved that whether or not I did my job had a huge impact on the company. I liked both the responsibility and the accountability, as well as the fact that my job was never the same twice in a week. Like, it changed every day. So that's how I found myself there. And I've kind of been loving this startup hustle ever since.
Now that you're a part of this startup side hustle, whenever you first join a startup, how do you know what gap needs to be filled first?
The thing about startups, and this is a long-winded answer, but the thing about startups is that there's always more work than the team that you have could possibly accomplish. And so it's really important to be trying to identify what are the most critical gaps, not just what are the gaps. Just because you find a gap in a process, in a tool, in a system, in a team, doesn't mean that you find it and that's where you act. What you want to do is really build almost a list of here's all the things that seem missing. Here's some decisions that need to be made that haven't been made. Here's some work that's not getting done. But then really look at it and say, which of these things, if we correct them, is going to have the biggest impact? So an example might be you have a team of 4 people in your startup. You now have 5 customers, and you might think that it's time to go hire a salesperson, right? That might seem like, oh, it's time to go sell. We need to get more customers on board. But it also might be that you all don't know your market yet. So if you go and hire a salesperson right now, that salesperson is not going to be successful because you don't have the tools to teach them how to sell. So instead, what you might look at is, we actually don't know our product market fit yet. So we're going to carve out 20% of our CEO's time to spend that time in front of clients understanding the market space. And how do we clear that CEO's 20% time? Well, typically you're going to clear that CEO's 20% time by getting busy work off of that CEO's plate. So instead, you're going to try and figure out ways to do that and what's going to free up that valuable time. So that's not a really clear answer, but the idea is to understand all of the pain points, or as many as you can, from, a day's worth of conversations with the entire team, but then try and figure out where the biggest impact can happen and act there first.
You kind of spoke on market analysis and understanding the market and the people you're promoting your product to. How can someone kind of validate the numbers that they're using in their market analysis to make sure they're looking at is accurate?
There are so many things that go into understanding product market fit. So one you mentioned is numbers. So understanding TAM, those who don't know what TAM is, it's the total addressable market. So the full market that your product reaches. In a lot of cases, that total addressable market is going to be much larger than your current addressable market. So an example might be, in our case, as Arrive, the point of sale where I was, the total addressable market was any in-person hospitality experience that needed a point of sale. So that's a massive total addressable market. But to go to market and say, we're going to sell to everyone who needs a hospitality point of sale wasn't realistic. So instead we said, where do we want to target first? And who has the most pain? And where can we solve a relevant problem? So we started breaking the market down into submarkets. Those submarkets were breweries, distilleries, wineries, restaurants, music venues, bars. And we started looking for which of all of this addressable market has the most unmet need. And what we identified, which is why we went to market the way we did, was craft breweries did not have a point of sale that met their need at all. So once we identified that there was a problem we could solve, because that's super important to your go-to-market, no matter what your business, is there a problem you can solve? Then we started to identify the size of the market and the speed at which that market was growing. In our particular case, the breweries, which we decided to go after, actually had an association, and that was the Brewers Association. That Brewers Association kept very good data of how many breweries there were, how many of those breweries operated tap rooms, and how many were being added. So how much was the market growing on an annual basis? So we had a really good data source that we could look at for that. You're not always going to have that clear of a data source. So what you want to do is just find the best data you can. Again, trade organizations are a really good place to look. You shouldn't have to spend a bunch of money. Like there's plenty of organizations out there that sell data. You don't need to buy data at this stage. Just do research online, do Google searches. Now with AI, go ask AI, ChatGPT or something to pull that data for you. There's plenty of data out there. You just want your data to be good enough. You don't want to make it up. You don't want to be guessing. But try and find 2 different data sources that give around the same number, and you can work from that. And then you want to build a plan to go after that specific market. It doesn't mean you're looking away from that full total addressable market. It means you're picking a niche. You're picking a subset or section of that market that you think is the lowest hanging fruit that you're going to be most able to sell into day one. So lots of words there, but once you've identified all of that, you actually want to get back out there. So don't go back into your development hole and start building product. Now that you've identified that market, get out there and start talking to them and really understand what drives the pain point, understand why they would want you to bring a new solution to market, and then start making sure that the product you're developing fits that. When I talked earlier about startups and part of why I like them, that every day is different, a big part of startups is a willingness to be wrong and a willingness to pivot when you find out that you're wrong, because you will be wrong. And I can almost guarantee you that any product you take to market is going to be wildly different than the product you thought you were going to take to market once you start doing this work. So you have to be willing to sort of let that commitment go and flex a little as you bring a product to market.
Whenever they need a problem solver, someone like you who comes in and kind of works on that fractional basis as a mentor and coach, when do you think is a good point for them to stop and say, okay, we need outside help?
Honestly, you should be getting outside help before you even start your business, if I'm being honest. Like right now with one of my previous founders, we're already starting to think about what's our next business, right? We want to do startup again. We want to build products again. And we have ideas, and we're taking those ideas to everyone right now. One of the pieces of guidance I received early on that I chose to ignore was, don't share your idea because someone might steal it. Share your idea. Don't listen to that. Share your idea with everyone who can destroy it for you. Because the more you can get people to pick your idea apart, the better you're going to come up with a product and a prototype to take to market. So I think you should be, in the beginning, looking for mentors, asking questions, going to other groups. There's all sorts of meetup groups. Like I'm big on going to, local AI builder meetup groups or startup meetup groups. There's tons of free organizations like that where you can just join and then talk to anyone who'll give you 5 minutes about your idea. When it comes to actually spending money, you have to be a little bit more careful, right? And I do cost money, and most people like me do cost money. But as you start building out your startup, a lot of fractional folks, if they believe in your idea, will work for equity in the beginning. The other thing is once you start raising, so when you build a startup, very often you're either going to fundraise, borrow money, start off with some funds that you have. The nice thing about fractional is there's no way as a brand new business with limited funds, whether it's angel funds or private funds, whatever funds you have, you cannot afford most likely to hire someone like me or my previous co-founders that have 20 plus years experience because it's expensive to get those people full time. But it's not expensive to get them fractionally, and you get a ton of benefit of learning from their mistakes. So I think, I sometimes think people underestimate the value of the fractional community and think, well, we should only hire fractional support if we have a dedicated project for them to work on. But what if you just got 5 hours a week of the brain power of someone who's done 2-3 startups before? That has immense value and can save you a ton of time and money.
Do you notice pros and cons of whether someone should be starting a startup with an LLC or a sole proprietor, S Corp?
That's an interesting question. I'm actually going through that right now with my fractional business. So I was a little unsure when I first got started if this was going to be a temporary side hustle or if this was going to be a full business, if I was going to lean into it. So I made the decision to register as an LLC and do that as what they call a disregarded entity, which is a single owner LLC. I think an LLC is always a good idea just because of the protections that it gives you that you don't necessarily get as a sole proprietor. So LLC is the way to start. But pretty quickly, an LLC can turn into a tax problem. So as an LLC, you're paying a ton in taxes. So, what I've found is, and this is just a number, don't hang your hat on this number, but if you have $80,000 a year or more in taxable revenue, it starts to make financial sense to shift to an S Corp and pay yourself a salary. Even if you have to hire an outside accountant, like a low end or low budget outside accountant to run that payroll for you and settle your employment taxes and payroll taxes, the tax benefit that you're going to get long term is going to outweigh that cost. So, if you're not making if you're making $40,000, $50,000, hang out in that LLC world for a while. But once you start getting closer to that 6-figure income, it might be worth the investment to shift to an S Corp. And I don't think people necessarily do that soon enough. I think sometimes people are a little hesitant to make that shift to S Corp, but the tax benefits are worth it, in my opinion.
How can someone go about hiring teams for just small members?
Okay, this is where I probably have the most opinions. So I'm probably going to talk too long here. But to give you a little story, when I was in the beer industry, part of what I did is I went a couple times a year to this beer and brewing accelerator for people that were about to start breweries. And we did a pitch session where people got to do their pitches and then we would vote on winners and they got a bunch of, funding for their startup, for their brewery. And the number one question that I focused on in those pitches was, what is your founding team and who owns what? And if they couldn't answer that question, they didn't get my vote. And the reason for that is probably one of the most critical mistakes that I see early businesses make is starting with the wrong team. So not just building the wrong team, but starting with the wrong team. An example that I would give is you're a really great developer, let's say a software developer, and you're building a product and you go find another really great software developer to build it with you. Now you have essentially one mind doing twice the work. So there's not anyone who's going to push you on the go-to-market side. There's not anyone who's going to push you on your business assumptions. And what people tend to do, what I have found people tend to do if they don't think, I'm not saying everyone, not everyone makes this mistake, but a lot of folks make the mistakes of hiring someone or partnering with someone that agrees with them. And what you want is someone who's going to respectfully disagree with you and who's going to bring something completely different than you do to the table. I think a great go-to-market startup team is somebody who is the visionary, the big idea person, right? Who's just full of ideas and lots of exploration, to partner with someone who just gets stuff done, right? That execution focused, okay, how do we get from A to Z? So that's a good partnership. Another good partnership would be a builder of the product, so a developer, technical developer, and a go-to-market strategist or business development lead, or a marketer, a really strong marketer. But you don't want your starting team to all be the same. The same is true as you actually start to build your team. So you've got your co-founder, you've built a product, you've raised some money, and now you're going to market. I don't know if folks on this call have ever heard of the concept of zone of genius, but zone of genius is that work that when you do it, you are like at your best. It's just like the work you do naturally that you're super strong at. The inverse to that is your zone of incompetence. It's like the things that you do at work that you're actually really bad at. So this might be a web developer who's having to do financial spreadsheets, right? They're going to be really bad at this thing over there. And so when you start to build your team, you want to figure out your most critical people. So your executives that you need either coaching or selling or coding, whatever that you need them doing, find out what are those incompetence zones that are taking their time and hire to fill those. Because the way that your company is going to accelerate the fastest is every single person is spending the majority of their time on the work that they are strongest at and not spending a bunch of time on things that they're not good at. And I think that this is often a mistake that people make in hiring is they think in terms of what do we need to hire someone to go do instead of thinking we've got really strong people here already and what's taking all of their valuable time away. And then how do we hire to take care of that problem? I hope that makes sense. But to me, that's a really important way to think about hiring in the early stages. As a startup, a missed hire, a bad hire can cost you the company, right? It's not like a large organization where you make a bad hire and 6 months later you're like, oh, well, that didn't work out. Let's go hire somebody else. Those missteps early in a startup can tank your business. So it's really important that every single hire is intentional, that you know exactly how this person is going to fill a gap in your organization, that you make sure you're finding someone who truly has the skills you need. This is another place where you can use a mentor or a fractional contractor. Let's say that you're a software engineer and you need to hire your first business developer. Well, as a software engineer, you probably don't know what a good business development person looks like. So you could easily get snowed in a bad interview. But what you could do is find a mentor, a fractional person. If you've got VC funding, maybe your VC has someone that can help you interview so that you get someone who actually has the expertise you're hiring for to evaluate the people you're hiring with you and for you.
So that seems to be a pretty big problem right there that you find is your team and how important it is to hire them correctly. What are some other problems and issues you find with startups that you're helping?
Probably the biggest one is product market fit. A little bit of what I talked about earlier. The best idea, the coolest product has no value if nobody needs it. And I'm not just saying wants it, I'm saying needs it. There's a lot of people who will tell you that your ideas are cool, that your idea is interesting, that it's neat. But if you're not solving a problem, either for a consumer that you're selling to or a business that you're selling to, you're always going to be deprioritized in their spending decisions. So really knowing the problem you're solving for the industry you're serving or the people you're serving is super, super important. I've seen it time and time again get skipped, where somebody just builds something and you know it's cool. Like you see the product, you're like, oh, that's awesome. But you can't identify why somebody would spend their money there. And what's probably going to happen in that case is you're going to get some early adopters that buy your product and then the market's just going to disappear. So really understanding what is the problem you're solving and understanding how to communicate that you're solving that problem. And then again, when you get the product in the customer's hands, those first initial customers, that you're constantly engaging with them to understand how the product's being utilized, what are the problems you didn't think about, how do you need to pivot and address those problems. So the second part of that answer is pulling away from the customer too quickly. So thinking that you have the answer, you've defined your MVP, you've gone to market and 5 people have bought it, and then thinking that you can just go sell it now that's usually not true because an early adopter is very different than your mass market is going to be in terms of buying. So you just have to keep leaning in to understand that buyer persona, understand why and how to communicate the value of your product. For those first early clients, you need to be building ROI. So understanding how did this help you, building case studies so that you can tell other future clients how you've helped your previous clients. So just creating that constant feedback loop is really important. And I feel like when people skip that, they can have a really nice out of the gate growth curve that just flops pretty quickly thereafter.
When you are working with all of these founders, are there certain qualities in a person that make them better and more prepared?
I'm going to steal this quote. I was talking to a VC friend of mine a few months ago, and he said, to do this work, you have to have exactly one screw loose. Not two, that's too many, and not zero, that's not enough. Exactly one. And I think that that's true. Like you have to have this willingness to work in chaos. You have to be willing to just throw your assumptions right out the window and start over sometimes. It's a wild determination to power through hard stuff because there are going to be days where you have no idea why you even thought this was a good idea. And then there will be other days where you feel like you're riding on a high, and you have to be willing to kind of weather those ups and downs, and they're not going away. So I don't want to make it sound like it's going to be up and down for the first year and then it'll settle out. No, it's always going to be in that space as you're growing a business that you get these nice plateaus where you're just on a high. And when that happens, enjoy it because you need to know it's going to flip on its head in a week or a month. And you just have to have a willingness to roll with it. But the flip side is the work is never boring. Like you're always coming up with creative solutions. You get to tap into your sort of most creative business self or technical self or whatever that part of you is. You get to see your product in people's hands and see the real impact of your work on a daily basis, right? You get in a large corporation, and I'm not poo-pooing that. It's a great opportunity for a lot of people, but you get in a large corporation and you have your lane that you stay in and you do the job in the lane that you're hired to be in. And you might not ever know how the work that you're doing impacts the end users or the customers that use your product. In startup, you're getting that feedback on an hourly basis. You're constantly kind of in the role of that feedback loop of customer to product. So you just got to have that curiosity, that flexibility, that willingness to work in chaos. I've heard people say sometimes that saying work is chaotic is a bad thing. And I disagree. I think there are people who love that and there are people who hate it. And it's a matter of finding which you are. Are you someone who likes to work in that constantly changing environment? Are you someone who's a little bit less into the risk of it and wants something more predictable? I think that's a personal decision for each person. But I love it. I can't imagine working any other way than in kind of that chaotic, creative, every day is a new day kind of workspace. That's where I thrive for sure.
And what advice would you give for someone trying to get started right now?
Gosh, that's such a general question because it depends on what they're getting started doing. But I don't know. I think I would just tell people to go for it. Like if there's an idea you think you have, if there's a product you think the world needs, if there's a business that you think you would enjoy building, start talking about it. Start asking questions. If you're looking to, open a secondhand store, reach out to other owners of secondhand stores and say, how did you do this? How did you get started? Don't be afraid to ask for mentors. One of the things I realized for a long time, I was afraid to ask someone, hey, will you help me? I could really use some advice. I'm about to do this thing. And I had this insecurity about, they don't want to be bothered. This is a busy person. They don't want to give up their time. And the thing that I've realized as my career has continued, when somebody reaches out to me personally and says, I could really use your mentorship, it feels wonderful. Like, I love being asked that. The absolute worst case is I say, I just don't have the bandwidth right now, but let me introduce you to some other folks who might. But I'm not going to be insulted. I'm not going to be bothered. And most people aren't, right? It's flattering to be asked for your expertise, for your knowledge, and to share that. So don't be afraid to ask, right? Look around you. LinkedIn is wonderful. I really do love that product. When I'm contemplating going into something new, I will reach out to folks who've done similar things and say, how did you get started? Right? My second client, when I started my fractional business, my second client came from someone I had just reached out to. And I said, hey, I'd like to talk to you about what you're doing and how you got your consulting practice started. And this woman was like, oh my goodness, I have some clients that I think could really use your help. And I had a client within about a week of doing that outreach. So you never know kind of where those introductions and leads are going to take you. But the best way to grow and build any business, from my perspective, the way I see it, is to network and learn from the people who've been there. No need to start from zero.
Are there any additional resources to help others start their venture?
Yeah, for me, I'm a chronicle networker. Like, I love networking. I think it's a really great avenue for anything you want to do, is just to build your network. Regardless of where you are, there are probably meetup groups nearby around the topic that you want to work on. So let's say you want to start a restaurant. There's the National Restaurant Association, which has state chapters. Look at that and see if there's any meetup groups or, organizations that you can join right now. Every community has a chamber, right? Connect with your local chamber and attend some of their events. I mentioned meetup groups a few times, but there's lots of them. Like, I decided I don't know anything, y'all, about AI, and I'm so intrigued by it. I've been really trying to learn a lot about AI the last 2 years or so. And so I just searched in my town. I was like, Boulder AI groups. And some of the answers I found were people that I knew. Like, I saw that somebody on LinkedIn had posted about a meetup group. So I pinged them and they introduced me to the group they had joined. So look for those groups and go, right? It's always awkward when you walk into one of these meetup groups for the first time because you don't know anyone and people are standing around, but everyone's in the same position you are. So just walk up to people and introduce yourself and start learning. I'm a big fan of podcasts like this one. Again, there's podcasts on just about everything. I bet if you did a search on how to start a brewery podcast, you could find one, or how to open a bookstore. It seems like there's a podcast on just about everything these days. So lots of good things there. And of course, there's a ton of great reading. I have a personal favorite. This is an old book. For those in the tech space, I'm a big fan of Crossing the Chasm and Inside the Tornado. They're books about the sort of ebbs and flows of technical startups. So if you're in the tech space, those are some really interesting books. But there's so much out there. And again, once you find one, we have these great tools now with AI where you can say, I liked this podcast. Can you recommend me another one with similar topics? So there's just so much out there. And again, this is another sort of nerdy little secret, but if you find a book that really resonates with you, or a speaker that really resonates with you, TED Talks. I freaking love TED Talks. Watch those. And if you find someone that you like, go look at their website and their books and see where they're speaking, because where they're speaking is often a place where other people that you're going to like are going to speak as well. So don't be afraid to kind of dive deep and get a little nerdy on the things that you're interested in, because there's hardly anything these days that there's not resources out there on. So
awesome. And Nancy, if anyone out there wanted to find out more information from you, where could they reach you?
Well, my website is nancytrigg.com. Pretty easy. You can also search for Trigg Performance Collective, or you can find me on LinkedIn. Pretty easy to find. I don't hide very much, so.
Great. Thank you so much for coming on, Nancy. We really appreciate it.
You bet. That was fun.
If you enjoyed that episode, then get excited because we have more content just like that coming out soon. If you just can't wait, then make sure to check out our YouTube Reels and Instagram story where we'll be giving away some juicy bits of future episodes. If you're not already, make sure to follow us on all of our socials, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram. If you have any questions for future guests, then make sure to check out our YouTube community tab where we post questionnaires for our teachers. Thank you for listening and enjoy your 529. Later, folks.